My name is Christine Clearwater with Drug Free Solutions Group, and our team worked with MCI's management team to design the company's drug-free workplace policy, taking into consideration MCI's operations, as well as any applicable federal and state laws, which is always important. Today, I'll present the employee education session, and following the presentation, there'll be a quiz based on what you've learned. So, let's begin. What are the three meeting goals? First of all, I want to educate you on the company's drug-free workplace policy. We're going to step back, talk a little bit about what are America's drugs of abuse today, why the company needs a policy, and then what do you need to know? What is your role under the policy and your responsibilities? So let's step back and talk about what is occurring right now. As of 2011, the fatality rate, the accidental death due by drugs, surpassed traffic accidents and has become the leading cause of death in America. In 2019, over 72,000 people died of a drug overdose, almost 200 people every day, and that has increased substantially since 2019. And of those, 49,000 of those deaths were caused by opioids. This number does not include those individuals that overdosed and actually survived the overdose. So what are the drugs of choice? There are many drugs of choice, and they are a bit trendy in what's popular at the time, but there are a plethora of drugs to pick and choose from today. So what happens if we have that much going on in society, if that many people are overdosing or are using? We hire from society at large. So we're really just a pattern of what's going on, a microcosm of what's going on in society. So we have the potential to hire in that problem, which is a safety and health issue. So to help ensure a better quality of life for all employees and their families and our communities, the company has developed a drug-free workplace policy. So what is happening out there? About 20% of Americans' workforce has a substance abuse problem. So basically 1 out of 5 employees across America has a substance abuse problem. 90% of all alcoholics are employed in someone's business somewhere, and 73% of all drug users ages 18 to 49, which is the majority of our workforce today, are employed in someone's business somewhere. And also becomes a very easy place to deal drugs. People aren't necessarily directly supervised. There's no law enforcement. There's a lot of mobility around the space. And who are our substance abusers today? There is no profile. Rich or poor, no education, no high school education, a PhD, small towns, big cities, gender, age, race. It doesn't matter anymore. It crosses all types of individuals and locations. So with that in mind, the company had to figure out how to put this together in a fair and reasonable way. And the first thing we needed to talk about was marijuana, because that's a big issue today, creating a lot of confusion. And it was important to the company that they didn't want it to be a personal issue or a moral issue or an ethical issue, that it was strictly a business decision. So let's discuss it a little bit more and break it down. So what is marijuana? Many of us think we know, but maybe we'll add something here today. It's a product of the hemp plant, Cannabis sativa. There are lots of ways to ingest it. The most common are if it's smoked, edibles, or vaping. What's interesting about the hemp plant is it's very complicated. It has 483 chemical compounds in the cannabis plant. There's only one, the mind-altering, the euphoric effect, the high, and that comes from THC, that chemical compound called delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. It can contain upwards of 30% THC. And it is addictive. As of 2000, enough studies had been done to determine that it is addictive in its own right. what's kind of an eye-opener is that in the 1990s, THC really only had a 4% content, whereas now it can have up to 30%. So you begin to realize it's so much stronger than it was in the past, and a lot of this is through the cultivation process. So that's the hemp plant. Now, in the case of what is hemp, it's a term for cannabis that contains less than 0.3% THC. It's not part of that chemical compound THC. It is a fiber that's derived from the plant, which contains high amounts of CBD. This is a non-intoxicant part of the hemp plant. It's harvested for many, many reasons. Industrial markets for use in products such as construction, automotive, pet food, clothing, furniture, paper, also chocolate, coffee, beauty products, healthcare products, all sorts of things. In 2018, the feds passed the Farm Bill that legalized hemp cultivation. It also left it up to each state to determine if they wanted to cultivate hemp or not. We have about a quarter of the states in the United States that now cultivate for hemp. The common name, cannabidiol, for CBD, is a very common product line throughout the United States now. It's extracted from either hemp plant or mature marijuana plant. And there are lots of ways to ingest CBD, either through oils or through edibles. It has been deemed the active medical agreement for with marijuana, so that it has been used for anxiety, pain, severe epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, inflammation, depression. It has been determined that it has medical value for many of these medical conditions. So, question I get asked often is, can I turn positive for THC? And in the case of THC, the answer is yes. In the case of can I turn positive for CBD use, the answer is not entirely sure. And here's why. In the case of CBD, it can stay in the system for 1 to 3 days. It depends how strong, how often, etc. And it can build up with continuous use if there's habitual use. So it could generate a positive test result based on the percentage of THC that's in that CBD product. Also, frequency of use, weight, water intake, cross-contaminations during the process of extracting the CBD, how much THC came with it. And many products are mislabeled and have above the recommended dosages. They also have 7 out of 10 products on the market today do not have the amount of CBD as advertised on the label. And there have been incidences across the United States where people have ended up in the hospital due to contaminated product, poison in the product, or spiked with synthetic marijuana, which can be very dangerous. So it is a problem because it's not regulated. So could you turn positive for excessive use or habitual use of CBD? It is a possibility. So you need to keep that in mind. So when it comes to testing, it only tests for THC. And what are the impacts of it? In the case of THC, how does it affect an individual? It can alter the senses, all the senses, sight, sound, touch, time, etc., sound. And it also can cause depth perception. So when marijuana is ingested, the THC goes to the brain and alters reality. It's the same thing that a can of beer or scotch and soda or a shot of tequila or whatever someone's consumption is. It goes to the brain, it alters reality. That's what it does. But also in the case of THC, it takes an extra step and it goes to the optic nerve and it reduces pressure on the optic nerve, which affects depth perception. So that can impair motor skills, can reduce reaction time, etc., with the idea that it can last upwards of 24, 48, even 72 hours, depending on the strength. And so someone may get a buzz on, someone may have that euphoric feeling for 3, 5, 8 hours, but bottom line is that depth perception problem can last a lot longer. It can affect memory and concentration and problem solving, and it can generate kind of move or emotional behavior issues like distrust, fear, and disorientation. Longer term use, habitual use, it definitely affects learning, understanding things clearly, lack of motivation, can affect emotional well-being, can generate mental illness, psychosis, and as I said earlier, addiction. So it is not a benign drug, and it is one of those that the company had to take into consideration to determine how they wanted to handle it. So in this case, it had to take a look at why all the confusion. And the confusion lies in the fact that there's no unified base of information. It's remained on the DEA Schedule 1 list, which is the highest, most controlled list, and therefore the laboratories have not been able to do research over all these years, and the pharmaceutical companies have not been able to do applications. And this has led to the fact that determining the differences between benefit versus harm, what is the differences that might be between medical use and recreational use, and of course, we've got federal law that says no, and state laws that are all over the board. So it has been a very challenging time to make sense of it. But the fact is, we have to keep in mind that as of now, it's not federally approved as medicine. The reason being insufficient number of clinical trials, because it goes through clinical trials to get passed by FDA, and that hasn't occurred. So we don't really know the benefits versus harm. It has helped a lot of people, there's no doubt about it. But the other pieces of it are there's no well-defined measurable ingredient that are consistent, meaning unit to unit. So if two people are prescribed 5 milligrams of Valium, they know they're getting exactly the same thing, and the next day they know they're getting exactly the same thing, etc. With marijuana, there is no consistent unit to unit. And there's no scientific evidence for FDA to approve it. It has a high potential for abuse and lack of safety. This is why it stays on the DEA's Schedule 1 list. So how does that relate to our workplace? Marijuana is illegal on a federal level, and MCI has taken that position and operates, and they do not allow employees to use or be under the influence at work. The states in which this might apply, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, those states may have medical marijuana privileges where someone can get a medical marijuana card or recommendation for the use of marijuana. But in those states have also said we recognize the risk factor and the safety factor, and therefore the company does not have to accommodate those people with medical marijuana cards or recommendations. So in other words, cannot be under the influence of marijuana at work, even if someone has a medical marijuana card. And of course, this includes recreational marijuana. So to summarize the position at work at MCI, the company prohibits use, possession, distribution, purchase, and sale of marijuana at work. The company will not hire and will terminate for being under the influence of marijuana, even if that individual has a medical marijuana card. An employee can't claim marijuana use for disability under ADA. Workers' comp will not pay out for an injured worker solely because they have a medical marijuana card and being under the influence at the time of the accident. Unemployment comp considers it misconduct based on the company's policy and therefore not payable. And medical insurance, of course, does not consider it a formal prescription these days. So that is the company's position on marijuana. Was a long part of figuring out where the company wanted to be on this, and this is a very common position across the country for companies. So what does our policy cover? It focuses on illegal drugs, cocaine, marijuana, heroin, opiates, etc., methamphetamine, use of alcohol. This is not on personal time, it's use, possession of alcohol at work, and misuse of legal drugs, of prescription drugs. So why is this so important to focus on these? There are direct costs related to substance abuse in the workplace. Someone who's a substance abuser is 5 times more likely to be absent, 1/3 less productive, contribute to 40 to 60% of all theft, use the medical benefits plan 5 times more likely, which is everybody's contributing to, and it's not for their substance abuse problem, it's for all the secondaries, depression, ulcers, headaches, all those kinds of things that can be caused by substance abuse. 35% of all accidents, injuries, and fatalities are caused by substance abuse. A recent study by the Department of Labor stated that 65% of all on-job accidents are caused by drugs and alcohol. Workers' compensation costs go up, 5 times more likely to file a workers' compensation case, and of course, violence and sexual harassment, about 48 to 52% of all that is substance abuse related. So on a day-to-day basis, it's about $12,000 per person per year to carry a substance abuser. How does that play out? If 20% of 95, so about 20% of the population we talked about earlier, that's about 19 potential substance abusers, at $12,000 per person per year, it's about $228,000 that's just blowing down the street. That also doesn't include workplace violence, sexual harassment, turnover, morale, a major lawsuit or litigation or workers' comp claim. So you begin to see this has a huge impact on the bottom line of the company. So when does the policy apply? The policy applies anytime someone's working for the company, at a facility, transporting between facilities, traveling on business, going to conferences and seminars. Anytime someone is wearing the MCI hat, they are covered under this policy. They have to comply with this policy. Who has to comply? All temporary, part-time, and full-time employees, including independent contractors, subcontractors, seasonal employees, and interns of MCI. Now, we also have some truck drivers that have to comply with Department of Transportation Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration regulations. They have their own requirements, their own policy based on DOT that they have to comply with. But these individuals also have to comply with the company policy because they're also employees of the company. So that's how that works. So that's who has to comply and when they have to comply. So how does it work? First of all, the company encourages people to get help before it becomes a problem at work, because once it's a problem at work, it's too late. And there's a mechanism for that to happen voluntarily and confidentially get assistance through the EAP, Employee Assistance Program, Medical Benefits Plan, and of course, there's numerous amounts of national and local resources available for help. In the case of the EAP, Employee Assistance Program, that's a program employees can access through a toll-free number, through a group that are specialists in this area, substance abuse, as well as can support issues related to marital problems, financial problems, legal problems, etc. And that information is confidential. That EAP cannot communicate back by law any information that you provide to the company. So there are ways of getting confidential help through the Employee Assistance Program and, of course, these other resources. Again, the policy, it establishes clear rules, what's appropriate behavior and what's inappropriate behavior. And it encourages intervention if anyone, not just a manager, but also an employee, is concerned that someone may have a problem or may be putting themselves or others at risk, that they should contact Human Resources Administrator. And that information that's provided to the Human Resources Administrator will be carefully investigated, appropriately investigated, and will be maintained confidentially. So if there is a concern about an employee, the HR administrator is to be contacted. The information is to be confidential by the manager, the employee, and HR, and managed accordingly, safely and soundly. The whole concept behind this is that drugs and alcohol and work do not mix. It is not a good combination. So let's talk about the rules. Let's talk about the rules. First of all, you'll find that most of them are very obvious and reasonable. First of all, use, possession, distribution, dispensation, sale, purchase, cultivation, or storage. And that includes a desk, a locker, automobile being used for company business, or other repository. Any of that, including a controlled substance, illegally used drug, or drug paraphernalia. This also includes synthetic products. These are products that simulate the effects of illegal drugs. In other words, you don't want to be bringing gummies into work and passing them out. Prohibited conduct also includes consumption, possession, manufacture, distribution, sale, storage, etc. of alcohol. Simply put, consumption, possession, and storage of alcohol is not permitted. We do have some exceptions, and we'll talk about that a little later on. Being under the influence of a controlled substance or illegally used drug, what is that? That's a confirmed positive drug test result. Being under the influence of alcohol is a violation of the policy, and that's a positive test result that yields a breath alcohol concentration of 0.02 or higher. Basically, there should be no alcohol in an individual's system during the standard workday. Leaving company property and returning to company property. So in other words, going out, checking out and going out for a meal or break or between sales calls, service calls, deliveries, whatever it might be, can't stop, have a cocktail, and return to work. Conviction. This is a conviction under any criminal, drug, or alcohol statute that occurs while working for the company, while conducting work, or while driving a company-owned, rented, or leased vehicle, or a personal vehicle while being used for company business. So this conviction, criminal, drug, or alcohol statute conviction, is attached to work. Conviction under any criminal, drug, or alcohol statute is a violation of the policy. Also, not reporting a conviction or an arrest that occurs under any criminal, drug, or alcohol statute within 24 hours of the next working day from the time of the conviction or arrest. Keeping in mind, this is attached to work while working for the company, while driving for the company, anytime representing the company. Refusing to consent to, submit to, or tampering with a drug test. Any of those, and there are 13 things, that constitute a refusal. And any one of those is automatic termination. In the case of returning to work outside your normal schedule, so in other words, let me give you an example. Your standard work schedule is 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. But your manager calls and said, listen, we have a crisis here at hand. We've got a flood in corporate office. We've got a problem out on a job site. And in turn, it's now Wednesday night or Saturday. and they're calling you. And the question is going to be, this is what we need you to do. Are you able to come in, and are you able to come in safely? And it's a yes or no answer. If there's concern that you're not safe to come in, all you have to say is no. They will hang up the phone and call someone else. And in the case of, if you drive, not reporting any change in driver's license, status. So, for example, if you have a change in driver's license status, it's dinged, you've lost it, you're limited or restricted, anything that might pertain to your driver's license status, and you need that driver's license for your job, you need to report that change within 24 hours of the next working day to your supervisor. Again, if your job function requires that you drive for your job. And then lastly, disclosure of any information related to testing, referrals, assessment, counseling, treatment, drug test results, consequences. All this is confidential on a need-to-know basis. Very important to keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to prescription drugs, from the company's perspective, it's about safety. So, reporting of prescription drugs that may affect an individual's ability to do their job need to be reported to their manager if they're in a safety-sensitive position. And we're going to go through what those are. So if an employee is in a safety-sensitive position and taking a prescription that may affect their ability to do their job, a lot of the painkillers, things like that, they need to report it. They need to bring a note from their prescribing licensed physician. What does that note say? Basically, they're taking a prescription and it is recommended they don't, for example, drive a vehicle for the next 7 days, i.e. the term of the prescription. You'll notice I didn't say what they're taking the prescription for or what it's for. So why or what are not to be reported? Simply, are there any restrictions? At which point there'll be a determination by your supervisor or manager with the assistance of HR administrator and the vice president of construction to determine if there is another job function that you can do for the term of that prescription. It's important to remember prescriptions are prescribed to a single person, one person, and it is not to be taken by family members or friends, etc. Also, it is to be kept in its original container at all times and only taken as directed. So that's the reporting of prescription drugs. And who are safety-sensitive positions? Those are individuals by a momentary lapse in judgment that they can have serious consequences by impacting themselves or others. So who are those here at MCI? It's all personnel driving company-owned, rented, or leased vehicles, all personnel driving personal vehicles being used for company business, all field personnel, all warehouse and yard personnel. These are safety-sensitive positions, and it is important to know why we have this list. It's for 3 different reasons. One, we just discussed the need to report a prescription drug that may affect the ability to do a job function. Safety-sensitive list is also those individuals who will be tested for probationary period, post-accident, and random drug testing. And lastly, safety-sensitive positions in the case of some state laws are restricted to safety-sensitive positions only. So those are the 3 reasons that we've identified this list. So it's important, are you in a safety-sensitive position or not? And therefore, these 3 things pertain to you. I mentioned earlier that the consumption, possession, and storage is not permitted, but there are some exceptions to that. And these exceptions pertain to potential company-sponsored function, professional events, business-related entertainment, and there are some storage exceptions as well. So let's go through them and be clear that it is only these times that consumption, possession, and storage can occur. But there's some caveats to that. An employee can never be under the influence. So simply because the company is allowing consumption of alcohol doesn't mean that you can drink with wild abandon. It means that at 0.04 or higher would be a violation of the policy. Minors are never to consume, and of course our DOT drivers have to follow the DOT rules relative to the consumption and storage of alcohol. Now, there's some guidelines I'm going to provide you based on breath alcohol concentration and 0.02 and 0.04. Day-to-day operations, there should be no alcohol in the system, and therefore the violation would be 0.02 or higher. For the times we're allowed to consume, 0.04 or higher would be the violation. So a guideline. What is a drink? Because a lot of times it's compared to number of drinks. A drink is a 1.5 ounce of 80 proof alcohol, 5 ounce glass of wine, 12 ounce beer. So for example, a 180-pound person who consumes 2 drinks in 1 hour will have an approximate alcohol level of 0.04 or higher. A 120-pound person consuming 2 drinks in 1 hour will have an approximate alcohol level of 0.06 or higher. So also consuming the same number of drinks with higher proof alcohol or higher gravity beers can cause a greater under the influence level as well. So it's important to keep these things in mind. Reaching a higher level will be different individual by individual. So it's not scientific. There is no scientific approach to this. It is related to a number of factors, such as individual age, gender, how much you've eaten, prior experience with drinking, tolerance level, weight. There are all sorts of things that play into this. So it is the individual's responsibility to be aware of these guidelines. So what are our exceptions? When consumption can occur? If there's a company party, like a Christmas party, a picnic, a retirement party, there can be consumption if consumption is authorized in advance by a managing member or a vice president of MCI. Still can't be 0.04 or higher. Consumption is permitted while attending professional events, conferences, seminars, symposiums, things like that. However, consumption can never occur during the normal working hours of those events or until the official meeting or event or training session has concluded. Consumption of alcohol is permitted while conducting business-related entertainment with non-company personnel or traveling on business. So non-company personnel, this is probably sales activities, entertaining customers, clients, prospective customers, etc., while traveling on business. Keeping in mind, you can consume traveling on business, but no matter when or where traveling on business, you still can't be under the influence of 0.04 or higher. Consumption of alcohol conducting business-related entertainment with company personnel, which has to be authorized in advance by a manager member or a vice president. A scenario like that might be a vice president takes out his team, talks about last quarter, next quarter, whatever it might be, and there's consumption of alcohol. Again, can't be 0.04 or higher. The last two, it pertains to those individuals who have company-owned or leased vehicles and using those vehicles on personal time. An employee in that situation, if they're using that vehicle on personal time, by the mere fact it's company supplied and owned or leased, they can consume alcohol outside of work, take their family to dinner, using that car, tailgate party, going to a cocktail party, whatever it might be. But if they're using that vehicle, they cannot be 0.04 or higher. So the intent here is if there's planned on further consumption, they should use another form of transportation. And then lastly, for those residing at a hotel while assigned to a remote project site, there can be consumption of alcohol, but never during scheduled work hours, including downtime, wait time, or on call. Keeping in mind while traveling on business, the entire time from the time one leaves to the time one returns, they're traveling on company business and have to comply with all company policies, including this one, and therefore the total time traveling on business can never be 0.04 or higher. So this covers when consumption of alcohol is permitted. Let's talk about when possession of alcohol is permitted. There can be storage of unopened, sealed alcohol containers which are not visible and locked in an employee's vehicle or a company supplied vehicle authorized for personal use while these vehicles are on company property and being used for company business. These are the only two kinds of vehicles that can store sealed, unopened containers of alcohol. So if someone goes off during lunch, they pick up a 6-pack of beer, a bottle of wine, it's in their car, it's not visible, the vehicle is locked, it's sealed, that's fine. Unsealed containers of alcohol will be seen as a violation of the policy. Storage on site in a facility. There may be times for an event or gifts or whatever it might be that there needs to store on site. To do that, and these may be opened, they are unopened, sealed containers of alcohol, not any opened containers, and they would have to be arranged by a manager member or a vice president. So that's it, storage in a vehicle, certain vehicles, and storage on site and how that works. Keeping in mind those DOT drivers can never store alcohol in a DOT vehicle. So let's take a look at some of the basics to remember. Be clear about on-call, meaning you're called outside your normal schedule, you didn't know you were going to work, make sure you're safe, and say yes if you are, or no if you don't feel you can come in. Secondly, never under the influence of 0.02 or higher for day-to-day operations, and for our exceptions, 0.04 or higher would be a violation. Be smart. Know when not to drive. Alcohol is not to be consumed at any time by minors, and all DOT personnel need to comply with the DOT regulated rules as it relates to consumption, possession, and storage of alcohol, as well as any other policy rules for the company. So how do we determine if someone is under the influence? It's done by a test. It's not done by an individual. It's an objective, scientific test tied to systems presence at a designated cutoff level. It's not just that someone has the drug in their system, it has to be at a certain predetermined level. And it's a tool and the only way to know if someone is under the influence or not. Keeping in mind, we don't have a drug testing policy. It is just a tool. Testing is simply a tool to know if someone's under the influence or not. We have a substance abuse prevention or drug-free workplace policy. It's not subjective. It's tied to a very objective system that is definitive, and it's a gold standard. It is not a form of discipline. So when does the company test? There are 10 times a company can test. At the time of hire, there would be a drug test. Probationary period during the first 60 days of employment for safety-sensitive positions. Reasonable suspicion drug and alcohol test. Post-accident drug and alcohol test for safety-sensitive positions. Promotion to a supervisor or manager position, drug test. Random drug testing. The selection is done by a computer, not an individual, and that's for safety-sensitive positions only. Return after layoff. Someone returns after a layoff and they're in a safety-sensitive position, there'll be a drug test. Client or customer required. So in other words, if one of our customers or clients requires a drug or alcohol test to be done for our work for them, then we will comply with that. Government required, which is our Department of Transportation, and of course follow-up for a drug and alcohol test for 1 year following rehabilitation. What are the consequences of a violation? A consequence for a violation, it can be anything from discipline up to including termination, depending on the violation. Using, selling, or possessing will normally end up in termination. And positive test results, keep in mind, positive test results will be viewed as a problem. If someone can't stay clean at work, that's a problem for which there's help needed. So more specifically, what are the consequences of a violation in a drug and alcohol test? Pre-employment, a no-hire determination. Post after that, a positive drug and alcohol test is automatic termination. A refusal to submit to or tampering or failure to report for a test equals a no-hire determination in case of an applicant or immediate termination for an employee. So how are these tests done? How is under the influence determined? It's a pretty sophisticated system, and there are 3 stages to it. One is the collection process. One is the laboratory process, and one is the medical review process. So let's go through what happens at each of these stages. In the cases of a drug test, a collection will be at a convenient location, on site, or at a local collection site. For most forms of testing, the collection for drug is a saliva test, and it will be conducted on site, and then that kit will be sent to a laboratory. These people are medical professionals or trained professionals to conduct these collections. There's a chain of custody involved that's very important, and the respect for privacy and dignity is maintained throughout. So the collection site is at a company location. There may be times where someone will have to go to a local collection site for a confirmation. Let's talk about the laboratory. In the case of a laboratory, these are NIDA certified, SAMHSA certified laboratories. These are the same laboratories that MCI has selected that the FBI, CIA, and DEA use. It's the highest standard. And the first step is it's a preliminary screen of that specimen. And if it's negative, the process stops. If it is deemed non-negative, meaning it's not positive yet, it goes on to 2 more tests, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, and this is the fingerprint. This is the gold standard, and it tells us exactly what drug and exactly how many metabolites. If someone's a polydrug user, it will show each drug and each of the metabolites that are in that specimen. So it is a fingerprint. It's exact. So the results, whether it's negative or non-negative, the results are electronically communicated to a medical review officer. And that medical review officer is a specialist. They're licensed physicians whose specialty is toxicology. And they work for you. They're your advocate as an employee. They don't work for the company. It's not management driven. It's an independent specialist who's your advocate as an employee. And their responsibility is to examine the test results and determine if it's negative or positive. If it comes to them negative and everything's intact, it goes back to the company negative. If it's non-negative coming from the lab to the MRO will contact that individual and ask if they have had surgery or taken a prescription in the last 30 days. And this is the opportunity, the review process with the MRO is the opportunity to discuss if there's a legitimate reason for that test result, i.e. a prescription. If they say, yes, as a matter of fact, I have a prescription, that MRO will say, who's your doctor, who's your pharmacist, and they will verify it's a legitimate prescription. If it's not a legitimate reason for having that drug in the system, it will come back positive. If it is legitimate, meaning that that individual has a legitimate prescription, for example, oxycodone or Percocet or whatever it might be, that result will go back to MCI as negative but safety concern. All the panels, all the drugs that are tested for have risk factor, have safety issues. So if it's one of these that's turned positive and the person has a legitimate prescription, but so it would come back negative, but safety concern. And this is how the system works. And it's a system that's a gold standard. The collection site, the certified laboratory, there are very specific cutoff levels. It isn't just that someone has, for example, the THC metabolite in their system. It has to hit a designated level. For example, marijuana is 50. If it hits 50 or higher, 50, 60, 75, 120, that's a positive. If it hits 27, 35, 42, 49, that's a negative. So it's not just that someone has it in their system. It's in their system at a designated level where the federal government and the court systems have supported that at those levels or higher, and each drug has different levels. In the case of marijuana, 50, at that level or higher, that person is at risk to themselves and others. So you can see the levels are high and fair. It's at a risk level, at a safety level. It's not just simply citizen presence, but at a designated level or higher, and it is recommended by the government and upheld by the court systems. So that's for drugs. Let's talk about alcohol. In the case of alcohol, and to complete drugs, it is determined at that level or higher that that person has been impacted in their job safety. And important to know also, you can't test positive for secondhand smoke passive inhalation. So it's not an acceptable reason to have a positive test result, because at that level or higher, it will not register passive inhalation secondhand smoke. So now moving on to alcohol. Remember, we have two under the influence levels, 0.02 for day-to-day operations and 0.04 for those times when someone is allowed to consume. I'm going to give you a chart here, and it's not scientific, but it's what the federal government uses, it's what law enforcement uses, it's what the court system uses, it's what insurance companies use. So it is not scientific, but it's an industry standard. And I'm going to give you a basis for breath alcohol concentration or oral fluid so that you can see how this works. Let's take a 180-pound person, weight across the top from left to right, 100 to 240. Number of drinks down the left-hand side, 1 to 10. So let's take a 180-pound person and drop 4 levels down to 0.08. This is the under the influence level for 48 states. 0.08, at which point 0.08 or higher, you get a DUI. So 180-pound person, drop down to 0.08, go hard left all the way across to the number 4. That's 4 drinks in 1 hour. Someone could have 4 drinks in 1 hour and not get a DUI, be right on the brink. Now let's come up a little bit. Let's take that same 180-pound person and drop down 2 slots to 0.04. And go from 0.04 under 180 hard left over, and you'll see that's 2 drinks in 1 hour. Now, if that's a DOT driver and they have 2 drinks in 1 hour and hit 0.04 or higher, they're going to lose their CDL and probably lose their job. For our case, that is our ceiling for the times we're allowed to consume. Now, that 180-pound person, the first slot below it is 0.02. Hard left, that's 1 drink. Basically, 1 drink before work or at work would kick out a 0.02, which would be a violation of the policy. So this gives you a little bit of feel of how it works. weight, how much you've had to eat, how used to drinking you are, what you're drinking. All these kinds of things will vary, but just like out on the highway, it is an individual's responsibility to know if you're violating, i.e. 0.08 or higher, etc. Same thing for our policy. So this tells us what under the influence is for drugs and what under the influence is for alcohol, and what your responsibilities are under this policy. So in closing, our nation has a drug and alcohol problem. There's no doubt about it. Substance abuse is a major issue in our nation. And because we hire from society, we are able to hire those problems into our workplace. And therefore, it was very important for MCI to establish a policy, and not only establish a policy, but have it be fair, have it be reasonable, have it be about safety, have it be about protecting individuals, an individual, the coworkers, the company as a whole, general public, families, and communities. So in closing, the policy benefits virtually everybody MCI people come in touch with. First of all, every one of you have a safer, healthier, more productive work environment to operate in. All the many non-users, which is the majority of our population, have a safer, healthier place to work. The users will be brought to their attention to not start, or if they're going to continue to use, their consequences, or preferably to stop and get help if they need it. And the company, safer, healthier, more productive work environment, better bottom line, better for all employees. And certainly we have customers, clients, vendors, and suppliers that we interface with every day, and having healthy, non-using employees to interface with is always a benefit. And then, of course, the general public, because we're out driving, and the benefit to the general public is there as well. So this concludes our session for today, and now you will be provided a quiz to complete, and I want to thank you for your time and attention.